sustainability, or in terms of issues to do with the environment. The scientific debate is over. It really is. I mean, even there was actually just yesterday or this weekend, the last of the skeptics, Richard Muller, who was I think geosciences at Berkeley, who regarded himself as one of the great skeptics of global warming, just did a study, was part of a study, and he said essentially, I'm convinced. I'm convinced of two things. Not only that global warming is real, he was not convinced of that before, but that climate change, global warming, is connected to human activity. So the debate, the scientific debate around global warming, it's been over for a long while. It should be officially be over. Anyone tells you that they don't believe in global warming or it's not caused by human beings is an idiot. That's an official term. Because it means that they don't believe in science. It means that they just believe in something that they just believe in without any evidence. And that, to me, is the definition of an idiot. Because you're just believing in faith. You're believing just because you believe it, you believe. Right? So the scientific debate is over. Now, unfortunately, the public debate is not. And if you now were to trace how the media deals with that debate, you'd still think that there was a debate. You'd think there were like two sides, and science is still divided, and there's some scientists who think this, and sometimes some scientists who think that. So we don't really know. So if we don't really know, we can't really take any action, right? Because you can only take action once you really know. And if you don't really know, and that's doubt. And that there is that creation of doubt is the end result of a very particular campaign run by funded by a very small number of people. Mostly, I'm trying not to be rude about it, but I mean, they're mostly really reactionary billionaires who just don't want the public to be able to think straight. And what they have done is they have funded a campaign. And this is the global warming is not the first time it's been done. Climate change is not the first time it's been done. It was done in relationship to cancer and the relationship of cancer to cigarette smoking. That was known by science and by people working in this a long, long time ago. And the public opinion was very slow to come around. It was slow to come around because there was a campaign, a propaganda campaign, that was designed to cast doubt on the idea of cancer being linked to tobacco. It happened with that. It happened with acid rain. It's happened with a whole bunch of things. And it's actually the same scientists. That you can buy these scientists. You just have to give them enough money, and they'll say whatever you want them to say. And the same scientists actually have been saying the same thing about this for a while. And they're now saying, it's the same scientists who are now saying the same thing about climate change. There's a great book that's been written, which I would highly recommend to anyone who's interested in this, because issues around sustainability, there's two issues. One is the actual issue. One is the actual thing to do with sustainability, to do with how we are, how we become environmental stewards, etc. What impact human activity is having on the ecosphere, right? That's one issue, and that has been decided. But the other issue is then how people understand it. And that issue is what is up. That issue is what is really clouding it. So, to such an extent that Americans are kind of unique around this, by the way. And the reason for that is because there's the most amount of this propaganda has been aimed at Americans. And so, today, around 40% of Americans don't believe that climate change exists and don't believe that it's connected to human beings, to human activity. I mean, in the light of the scientific evidence, that is just astounding. And the only reason people can think that is because they have been told another story that it's all, we don't really know, it's all kind of in doubt, and as one scientist says this, and that is, there's a great book being written called Merchants of Doubt.
It's by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway. Naomi Oreskes is a professor at UC San Diego. And they've traced through this campaign of how the public has been systematically misled on a whole host of problems so that we will not take action. We will not take action. And that is where we are right now in terms of, for example, this next election. I mean, I'm not a great fan of Obama. If I have time for another lecture, you know why. You know, Obama is, in fact, you know, Obama is no socialist, he's no progressive, he's none. Obama is a mainstream Democrat. A mainstream Democrat. That is, he's someone who is funded by business money, by corporate money. Okay, there are not two candidates. There is not like an anti-business candidate as Obama and a business candidate that is Romney. These are both Democrats and Republicans. The Democratic and Republican Party have both been taken over by business interests and by corporate money. And that's just, and Americans think that somehow that there's a real choice between Democrats and Republicans. There's a very good line, Gore Vidal, the historian, said he's got a great line, said, America has one political party with two right wings, one called Democrat and one called Republican. And there are some differences between Republicans and Democrats, and they come out on, but on economic issues, actually they're very, you know, the most, if I was to, we would talk about the differences between Democrats and Republicans, real differences, not, okay, they mostly be around what we think of as cultural issues, around issues to do with gay rights or with civil liberties, etc. Not to do with what I call real issues, which is economic issues, of which there is almost total unanimity. Okay. So when Obama was elected as President of the United States, he wasn't elected as a progressive. If you read the job description of the President of the United States, it actually says the job of the President is to run the American empire. And you do not elect a progressive to run the American empire. You run someone who's competent to run the American empire. And what we have right now in the next election, so that's my, you know, I'm not a great, you know, I don't think Obama is that different, mainstream Democrat, but in the next election, I think actually there is something really at stake between two different ways of thinking about the world. On the one hand, there is, I think, what is a rational way of thinking about the world, and Obama is the representative of that. And his job is not to transform the system. His job is not to create socialism. His job is not to lead to, you know, is not to deal with income inequality. His job is to manage the system and to keep it running a little bit longer. Put the band-aids on the system. What does that require? It requires a stimulus. It requires is to keep capitalism running. The other viewpoint, represented by nowadays the Republican Party, which has been taken over by the money of these lunatic billionaires, like Sheldon Adelson and the Koch brothers. They are what I would call religious, but not religious as in God religious. They're religious in that they really believe that lowering taxes, cutting government spending, having no constraints on business is what is good. They really believe that. Even if, as we are in the present moment, even if taking off any kind of restraint will in fact destroy the system. They just believe it. They're believers in, you know, in this idea. They don't really care if everything goes down with it. That's the Republican Party being taken over by these, you know, by these. I mean, they're you know, reactionary ideologues. They don't really care about reality. They care about this idea. The Democrats actually are, in one sense, rational, and they actually shouldn't. I mean, those people with money, capitalists, should really realize that their interests lie with Obama, because he will at least attempt to save the system. Not save it. He will attempt to patch the system. Now, when it comes to the environment, we are at a crucial point right now. If Romney was to win, and if that
And it's not Romney, it's what Romney represents. If Romney was to win and you were to have these policies that came along with him, the environment would be done. I think it may already be done, but there may still be hope. The environment would be done because there is no hope of a kind of a rational debate or a rational way of thinking about it. At least with Obama, there is some rational way of thinking about it. So we're at a really vital stage. That's the political stage we're at right now. And I mean, you're all interested in issues of sustainability. I think every single person in the world should be interested in issues of sustainability. Because what you're really talking about is what the future of the world is going to look like. Whether you're interested in sustainability, that's what the material future is going to look like. And whether we're going to live in something that we may call kind of civilization, that is governed by some rules whereby we care with each other, or care for each other, or something that could be very, very barbaric. That's a choice. That's the choices between us. And as I said, I don't think Obama is the great representative of progressive hope, but the Democratic Party, the mainstream Democratic Party, at least has still that hope that this system can be patched in some way. Not transformed, not just patched enough. And that's what Obama did with the stimulus plan. With the stimulus and the buying out of, and the bailout of Wall Street, that wasn't an attempt to change anything. That was just an attempt to. The system is. We were almost totally broken, and that was just an attempt to hold it together. Can we do it for much longer? That's the short term. That's what's at stake in this next election in the short term. Long term, of course, there's something else that's really at stake, because that kind of holding the system together can only hold for a very short period of time. We're at the edge of that, and the question is, can we survive until we can make the transition? That will depend on whether you, can mobilize public opinion enough to sway, to support new policies, new ways of thinking about the world. And the battle is, I wish I could be more hopeful about that, but I believe you need to lay out what the reality is that you're battling against. And what you're battling against is not only this unbelievable, not only these billions of dollars being spent by these lunatic madmen on the one hand to push their one idea of the world which will destroy us. But the other thing, and I'll talk more about this, the other thing that we really have to kind of deal with is just the everyday culture of consumerism. And the everyday culture of consumerism is that human beings are defined by the products and by the commodities that we buy. And that in fact human activity and human happiness is connected to having access to more things, having access to more stuff. And that is the ideology, and that idea that somehow our happiness is connected to the economy growing. That may be an even more dangerous idea, because that idea of that we have to keep having more products that we define ourselves through consumption, that we define ourselves through shopping, that we define ourselves through products. That idea is based on a notion of economic growth. We have to keep growing. And if you look at the economic debate, or any economic news, it's always about how much has the economy grown? Has it gone down? Has it gone up? Right? How much has it grown? And the idea of negative growth is, it will kill the system, because capitalism as a system depends upon growth. There's a flaw in the logic of capitalism. You can't have growth. You can't have infinite growth in a world that has finite resources. It's an impossibility. No matter how much you may believe it, that is an impossibility. And we are now reaching the limits of that physical world. Okay, we can see it in two ways. I mean, we see it in climate change. I mean, it's literally, I mean, when we say human beings have changed the climate, what do we mean by that? We mean the way we produce things has changed the climate. Factories have changed the climate. Industrial production has changed the climate. That's on the one hand. A big problem already, right? And some people, like Bill, I don't know if you've been reading Bill McGibbon, who's the main person I would read on this. I mean, he's one of the people I respect most in the world, because that's what he's battling for right now. So on the one hand, there's climate change. And all of this is connected to consumption. All of this is connected to very everyday things like shopping. And all of this idea of growth is in the messages that surround us our entire waking days. It is in every single ad message that we see. Buy this, it'll make you happy. Go on, just one more. That is in every single message. It is an ideology of growth. Secondly, we are running out of resources. I just went to a great lecture last week, actually. I recommend another book by Michael Clare, who is he's actually teaches at Hampshire College in the Valley, and he is a great expert on resources and geopolitics. And his new book is called The Race for What's Left. And essentially that's what international relations are going to be. It's actually the race for the few resources that are left. And it's the reason why, for example, the United States has just opened a new military front in Africa called AfricaCom, because Africa is one of the last places left where there may be resources. But resources are running out, not just oil, but a whole bunch of other things as well. Presumably, have people heard of peak oil? The idea of peak oil? Well, that we have the oil. If you see how oil is being produced, that oil. Sorry, I'll go through it from your end. So if you think about it as a graph, oil at the start, it's really easy to dig out of the ground, or it just gushes out of the ground, and so there's an increase in how much we can produce. Then after a while, but at some point, it's no longer easy to produce. It's no longer the stuff that's on the surface that's being gushed out. After a while, you have to go deeper and deeper into the earth. You have to go deeper and deeper under the oceans. That was the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, was because those people that they're going, BP is digging deep into the ocean. And after a while, you come to this peak, and that's called peak oil. And that's simply about how much we can produce. The United States reached peak in 1972. Oil consumption didn't stop in the United States after that time. Oil consumption kept going up, and that's why the United States is now relying upon foreign oil. And that's how you explain American foreign policy over the last 50 years. Now, the idea was, actually, and I get this again from Michael Clare, which I highly recommend. The theory of peak oil says, right, that the oil goes up to this peak, and then it starts coming down. And how much you can produce of it starts coming down. Even though we may need more, even though the demand for oil hasn't gone down, because you have to keep growing. The economy has to keep growing. But oil comes down as there is demand on that, which means actually whatever you're going to be able to produce is going to have a very high price, which is why oil prices have been going up. Now, it looked for a while that actually, when you looked at patterns of oil consumption, it seemed to be absolutely perfect. And if you want to trace this in terms of when the world will hit peak, not individual nations. The United States hit peak production in 1972, and different nations hit at different times. The question is, when will the world hit peak? And if you want to know that, then you've got to watch what Saudi Arabia has done and how much Saudi Arabia is able to produce. Because when Saudi Arabia hits peak,
that's when the world will hit peak, because Saudi Arabia is the major producer of oil. That's why there's a lot of, that's why you never talk about Saudi Arabia and human rights. If you want to know the most repressive regime in the Arab world, it's Saudi Arabia. And yet it is America's biggest ally. Why? Because of human rights? No. By the way, that's if you want to understand American foreign policy, and you think it has anything to do with human rights, that is the biggest lie that is being propagated. American foreign policy has to do with energy and resources. Has done since 1945 and will do until into the future. So we've now reached peak. That's with resources. Actually, and what Michael Clare now says, we actually haven't started to come down, because prices are so high for oil that oil companies, and actually not just for oil, but for things like nickel and copper and other things, that it's now kind of hit a plateau. And more effort is being put into extracting the same amount of resources. This I hope you can follow it. Like this line here, that's what's called easy resources. It was easy because it was easy to get. We've now come to the time where it's not easy. And as we extract more things out, it is going to cost us more, and it is going to be unbelievably environmentally destructive. And they have to keep doing it because you need the resources to keep growing. And in fact, prices are really high, so you keep. But to do that, you will. I mean, that the whole debate around the Keystone thing that's happening around the Canadian tar sands, etc. Canadian tar sands is not easy oil. It's hard oil, and it's going to require huge amounts of resources and energy to be able to get that out. So we're now in this world of hard resources, and we're at this peak, and we may be able to maintain it. It's going to be it's kind of a plateau, kind of going up and down a little bit. It's not going to go up. That world is over. The world of easy energy, the world of easy, that's done. We have no possibility of getting back to that. What we have now is the world of hard energy, and to get the energy that we need to keep going like we do at the present is going to require even more environmental destruction. And then eventually it will come down. It will be on the other side of the bell curve. The bell curve goes up, the bell curve goes down. Climate change, resources. The third thing, and what this is all connected to growth. This is connected to producing more stuff. Why? So we can buy more stuff. The third thing that the growth is connected to, and that consumerism is connected to, is debt. And there are huge, some of you may already be, hopefully you're not, too young to have credit cards, I hope. But large numbers of people are in huge amounts of credit card debt. Why? Because they want to sustain a lifestyle or a way of life that their income cannot sustain. They have bought into this idea that this is what it means to be, this is what I need to be an individual. This is what I need to be to express myself, and my income doesn't match that. Therefore, I have to borrow. And that is the economic crisis of 2008 that we are still in. That was caused by debt. All of it is being driven. All of it. So climate change, resources, debt. It's actually what I call the perfect storm of crisis. I mean, it really is kind of a kind of apocalypse in terms of where we are. We're a unique stage in human history. You're at a unique stage, and you have a unique role to play in human history, because what you do and what your generation does, along with everyone else that's alive right now, will determine whether we have a world or not in the future. That's about the world involved, right? It's been driven by consumerism, and it's been driven by this and what is the voice of consumerism? The voice of consumerism is advertising. And advertising has moved into every nook and cranny of the culture. It has taken over everything. There is no place that
that is now devoid of advertising. I mean, if I had time, we could spend an hour just going into the different places. But if you want, let me give, for those of you sports fans, I'll give you one indication. And in this, although some of you may be too young to this, but you remember this, but it used to be that when you watch baseball games, the shot from behind the pitcher, actually there was no ads. There were no ads behind home plate. That is an invention of the last 10 years. Why? Because because you have to keep growing. And you have to, in terms of keeping growing, you have to get people to buy. And to get people to buy, you have to keep convincing them every single moment that they're alive, that they have to buy. And therefore advertising moves into, takes over all of media. All of our media systems are financed by advertising. It moves into education, moves into high schools, it moves into universities, it moves into streets, it moves into every single place where people are alive. I show a clip actually when I have more time, where corporations are now talking about how they can take over the skies and be able to either to project their logo onto the surface of the moon, or to send up billboards, mile-wide, mylar billboards, to be able to put their logos on. It's such a waste, the sky. It could be a selling opportunity. For those of you fans of the Olympics, why couldn't you watch the Olympics live last Friday? You couldn't. No. I was desperately trying to watch the opening ceremony live because I wanted to get everyone in prime time, because then you'll be able to boost the advertising revenue that would come from it. So you couldn't actually, here were Americans were deprived of the opportunity to watch the Olympics live so that NBC could maximize advertising revenue that evening. And therefore you couldn't watch it live. Right? We have to watch it, I watched it at 7:30, which was 3.5 hours after it started. Right? That's how that advertising logic is just everywhere. That advertising logic is and then what does every ad tell us? What every ad says is, it doesn't say think about the environment, it doesn't say think about community, it doesn't say think about it says think about yourself. Think about how this product is going to be good for you. And that ideology, that notion that we should only think about ourselves, if we do that, we are all there. Literally, actually, I wish I could say figuratively, but if we do that, then because the only hope we have of dealing with the environmental issues is if we think not of individuals, but we think of the whole. And there is nothing in advertising that encourages us to think about the whole. Nothing in advertising that encourages us to think about the future. There is no vision. There is no vision of community. The only vision is of individuals and the relationships they're in, and how that is connected to objects, how that is connected to products. And yet, this is the dilemma. We have to come up with a new way of thinking. We have to come up, as a society as a whole, not just look. We have to come up with new ways of thinking about the world. That is about how the collective can be saved, of how the community can be saved, and how it can be saved into the future. And yet, what surrounds us are these, on the one hand, these messages from politically motivated individuals about how there's no problem with any of this, and then all these messages about products and about how we can be happy individually. We can be happy if we just buy this. If we just buy this next thing. If we just have this pair of shoes. If we just have this lipstick. If we just have this car. We have the list is endless. And we've got to. But that's, by the way, that's a lie. Products don't make you happy. You don't have to believe me. That's what the research says. The United States, for example, just take America. The United States, is twice as rich as it was 50 years ago. You have access to more things, you have access to more stuff than your parents did and your parents' parents did. In absolute terms, no society, no generation has had as many things as you have had. No generation has had access to as high a level of higher lifestyle as you have had. So if it was true that things made us happy, and we would be all ecstatic, all of us. Or at least there will be a rise in the level of happiness in the society. More and more people will be happy because look, we have more and more things. But in fact, when you look at the research that's been done on levels of happiness, when people are asked, are you happy? Or levels of happiness actually have declined, have gone down. Sorry, going from the other side, historically have gone down. As the amount of goods that we have access to has gone up. So it's an absolute lie, the idea that goods can make us happy. Advertisers don't believe it. They haven't believed it since 1920. If you look at the history of advertising, in the first period, they actually may have believed it. This is from about 1880 to about 1910, 1920. Advertising actually talked about products. It said where they were made, it said where they came from, it said how good they were. Right? They talked about products. Since about 1920, advertising has stopped talking about products and has talked instead about how products will. You want a good family? Products will do it for you. You want a good love life? Products will do it for you. You want intimacy? Products will do it for you. You want friends? Well, just drink the right beer. What advertising has done is taken what really does make us happy. What makes us happy is sociability. What makes us happy is human connection. What makes us happy is community. What makes us happy is friendship. Right? That's actually what human beings are about. We're a social species. None of those things can be provided by products. Which is why the moment, which is why the moment you buy a product, right, 2 days later it's in the trash. And you have to go out and buy another one. If they really made us happy, we would be, but they don't. So happiness, we are no happier. I mean, it is. If you think about it in a rational way, right? We have spent huge amounts of money, we have gone into debt, we have destroyed the world, literally. And we have, and has not delivered what we thought, what it should have delivered, which is increasing levels of happiness. In fact, it's gone down. It is the biggest lie. And so, and what we've got to do is, what you've got to do is, but that lie, right, that lie is pumped in every single ad message. Actually, in that sense, advertising is, I think about it as a drug dealer. It's on the corner. Go on, come one more hit. Come on, just one more time. and it's like, oh, this time it'll make me happy. This time a pair of sneakers will do it. This time, right? And then you get them home, and of course, like the drug addict, like it's a temporary high, and the moment the high disappears, you actually are in pain. And yet, we have given over all our public spaces to advertisers, to corporations, to pump these lies about what makes us happy. So what our job, your job, is to come up with, and I think this is actually the main, policies is not the issue. We know how to create a sustainable world. That's not rocket science. There are people working on that. We can create ways of living that are sustainable over a long period of time. And actually, I think that will make us much happier as a result. Actually, I mean, the other thing, one of the best films I've seen over the last 2 years. It's a fantastic film, really depressing, as are most things that I look at. But it's a film about the oceans called The End of the Line. And it's about fishing and about why the fish are disappearing. The fish are disappearing. It's probable it's probable that by 2050, which is literally, that's nothing in historical terms, it's possible that the bulk of the fish in the sea will be gone. Why will they be gone? Because we've eaten them. And they'll be gone because there are these massive, there's industrial fishing, massive trawlers that just fish, that can just take fish out of the sea, and that we keep eating and eating and eating. It's actually most probably before you were born, in 1992, the government of Canada actually banned fishing off the coast of Newfoundland because the cod had disappeared. And this was, in Nova Scotia and on the east coast of Canada. There was a whole way of life based upon fishing that was just destroyed. It's gone. Why? Because the cod went. The cod had been, we'd eaten them. We'd fished them and then we'd eaten them. It's very probable that within the next 10 years, unless we change what we're doing, the tuna will be gone from the oceans. The Mediterranean tuna will be gone. And I would really recommend this film to you. It's called The End of the Line. And it's based on a book by the same name by a guy called Charles Clover about the oceans. Okay, what we have to do is we have to come up with, it's not the policies. Policies are not the issue. What we have to come up with is a way, is a vision or an imagination about what a different world could look like. Of what the world could look like that is not based upon products. That is based upon, in fact, a deeper relationship with the material world. That's the problem with advertising. I mean, people say, advertising is so materialistic. I wish people were more materialistic. If they were more materialistic, they would pay more attention to goods. They would have a deeper relationship to goods. They wouldn't buy goods one day and throw them away the next day. That's not materialism. That's a very shallow relationship with objects. If we really had a deep relationship with the physical world, with the material world, and we really thought about it if we really thought it was part of us, then we would treat it differently. So this is not about an anti-materialist philosophy. It is about how you have a deep materialist philosophy that is sustainable, that will not destroy the earth, and that is above all fun. That is more fun, that is about more pleasure, that is sexier, that is more entertaining than the vision of advertising that surrounds us. And that's actually the real battle that we're in. It's actually a battle of imagination. Of how you can, that's advertising's biggest impact on us. That what it is, it's not about whether Budweiser works, or Budweiser ads work, or Miller ads work, or any ads work. It's not about it's what advertising has convinced us is that products are what make us happy. And what we need is a vision that, in fact, something else makes us happy. Human connection makes us happy. And how do we organize a society based around that? If you don't believe me, by the way, about what makes us happy, just look at advertisers. Look at advertising, sit down, watch some advertising. Forget it's about products. Look to see what images they use to sell us the things they have to sell us. They use images of what? Images of friendship, images of family, images of intimacy, images of love, images of work that people enjoy, images of relaxation, images of pristine nature. That's what's real about advertising. But what advertising does and what consumerism does, it takes that notion, that idea, which is real, which is true, and it says, you want this? Well, it's connected to products. And it links that with the marketplace. It links it with things you can buy and sell. And your job, and our job, is in fact to unlink it. And link it with something else, a different vision of the future that is sustainable. We don't have to start from scratch. Advertising has already given us the images. Advertising has already given us the vision. Advertising has already told us what we think of as pleasurable. It is just that's what's real, right? If advertising was all a lie, we'd reject it in a second. It's not a lie. What's real about it is that it actually does refer to the deep sources of human satisfaction. But that's true. What's The lie is it says they're connected to things. That's the lie, and you've got to break that lie. You've got to connect it to something else. And that, if you can do that, that will be the first step towards then a world in which you can have sane policies, in which you can have policies in which you can have a way of looking at the world that is sustainable, that is sensible. And in one sense, I think we are actually at a unique period. We're at a breaking point, which is why the world is breaking. The world is breaking. The Occupy movement that came up last year, that's actually the first step, or the first kind of expression of a different way of thinking about the world. The Occupy movement wasn't about demands. You know, when all those people said, "What do they want?" I don't care. What Occupy was a cry for something different. Was a cry cry for sanity. And actually, one of the things that's most interesting, I remember listening to one of the most prominent authors on this is a woman called Naomi Klein. And I saw an interview with her at Occupy, and she says, one of the great things about, do people know what I'm going to say, Occupy Wall Street and what happened in Sut Jhally? She said that, one of the great things about Occupy was that, she said, people, when she was there, and she said, people would come down to Wall Street or to Zuccotti Park. They'd come down to see what was going on, and they wouldn't leave. They wouldn't leave because it was so much fun. They wouldn't leave because, in fact, it was a different way of being in the world. They wouldn't leave because they were connected with other people. They wouldn't leave because for the first time they had a different sense in the imagination of what a future could be. And that is why Occupy in general is so scary to the mainstream political system and to corporations. It's not scary that they don't care about what's happening, they care about what's happening in the imagination. They care about the ideas that it is fomenting in people, and the ideas that in fact there could be a different way of being in the world. And that Occupy in fact was a demonstration of that. They had generators, right? Generators based on what? On people on bicycles. And so they go down and people will be on bikes and they'll be generating their own energy in the park. That's a different way of thinking about energy. And if you'd given them more time, they would have had solar panels up pretty soon. They would have had wind power up pretty soon. That is what had to be stopped. That is why they had to be smashed. Which is why the police moved into all these Occupy things over, in the country. It wasn't about law and order. It was about imagination. It was about smashing a different way of thinking about the world. And your job, in fact, is to come up with the right policies, yes, come up with the projects that work on an everyday basis, but more importantly than that, is also to talk about why this is good to do, not just because it's duty, not just because it's going to save the world, but why this is going to be fun. Of why this is going to matter to people, why it's going to make them feel good to be able to participate in this world. And if you can do that, then I think the world is full of the history of the world is full of all kinds of examples where people have turned around terrible situations. By the way, we wouldn't be the first civilization that has been brought down by growth. There have been numerous civilizations. You could talk about Rome, ancient Rome actually, as being brought down by it grew too much, couldn't sustain its supply lines, it grew too much, and in fact left it weak for the hordes that came in. And I think the future could be one of two things. I hope the future is Occupy. I hope the future is people taking control of their lives in a democratic way, participating in that. That's one future. Well, another future could be the opposite. Another future could be where we are terrified of each other and we turn on each other and we become even more insular. And I think we are seeing the start of that. I mean, the anti-immigrant movement
is one way. The Tea Party movement, which wants to blame outsiders, which wants to blame, right? That's not a progressive movement. It's drawing upon the same anger, but it's going in a very different direction. So the movement, it could either go towards fascism or it could go towards a progressive democracy. That's not decided. There's nothing written in history that it will go one way or the other. It will go one way or the other based on what people are willing to do. But the starting point of that is this kind of another way of thinking about the world. The starting point of that is in the imagination. And once you can convince people of that, you can convince people to do anything. Once you can convince people that it's going to be fun, you can even convince them to make all kinds of sacrifices. That's your job. Okay, so I'll stop now, and if you have questions, I'll be happy to take them.
We're going to do a quick round of applause with your questions.
I have to tell you, I was really disciplined. I only talked for 40 minutes. I'm very
Yay, that was great. I have a question. So when you were talking about the United States as like a specific place where advertising has been really concentrated, etc., trying to convince us of all these things that are false about our personal happiness, then you kind of switched gears and talked about how we're going to solve this. It just got me thinking about national borders, and I just wanted to hear your perspective on, like, if we're really to change this, how do you think nationalism is going to play a role? How do you think that we should be treating that or taking it into consideration as we try to move towards a more progressive reality?
Yeah, I mean, corporations don't take borders for granted. I mean, they don't believe in borders, right? Mm-hmm. And so corporations are global. I mean, they work in a global way. They work in global terms. And in fact, everything we've talked about, I mean, in terms of sustainability and the effects of environment, the effects of industrial production, or the effects, when the reactor went up in Fukushima, it wasn't as though those radiation clouds stopped at the border of Japan and said, "Oh, we can't go out any further." Right? So we live in a world that is totally interconnected. And I think what's interesting, although we'd also then operate on a very local level as well. And so I think the major changes actually are not going to happen at a national level. Mm-hmm. For example, I think in the United States, the national level has been so bought up and compromised by corporate money, it's impossible to do anything in Congress. I wouldn't even tell people to bother. It's just a lost battle. But local battles are not. You can do something in your town. You can do something in your region. You can do something at the state level. And I think, in that sense, that's when you talk about local and global. I think the question is, what is local? And so I would encourage people to really think about locally, because that's how it's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to grow. It's going to build from small beginnings. And as people see the experience of this in their own lives, in their own activities, it will then become a model for other things. At the same time, I think it's not an accident that you had Tahrir Square and Occupy happen within a very short period of time, and you have all these things happening in the Middle East, and then you have things happening in Spain, and we now live in an interconnected world, and then the tools that we have access to, and they're great tools. I mean, the internet is the online apparatus is a great tool. It's a great tool for organization. It allows us now to operate on this global basis. So I think, it's a cliche to say you've got to be both local and global. Mm-hmm. But I think that's what you do have to do, but you have to. I would cut out that middle step. I would cut out the national step, and mm-hmm. Actually the national step is not, because I don't think we're going to be effective there. Not that it's not. There's a lot of resources that are gathered there. There are a lot of. At some point you have to deal with what the federal government is going to do, because they look at how much money they collect every year through taxes and look to see what they fund, mostly the military. And how do you change those priorities around? But I don't think that's going to happen until you start changing at the global level. But there are also, that can happen. But there are also these international movements as well. And young people especially, are connecting across borders.
I mean, that's one of the things that Facebook and Twitter has done, right? I mean, borders, and what do borders mean? You know, that the Chinese are now starting to desperately trying to control it still. But yeah, that's a kind of losing battle. So local and global.
Where you said that Americans have a very centered view where like they don't, you know, a lot of them don't even believe global warming even exists. Do you see other parts of the world having a more open view to climate change and being more progressive in like accepting change in their lifestyle and whatnot?
Well, I think you've got to, good question, I think you've got to distinguish between what governments do and what people do, and what public opinion does. So, for example, in Europe, public opinion is very different. Like if you do when you look at public opinion polls and around issues of climate change, it's very, very different to the United States. The United States is unique in terms of how the public thinks about this. Okay, governments are not, the government, you know, the Chinese government is not going to come along with, is not going to go along with, you know, with restrictions on, you know, carbon emissions because their economy is based on it. And so governments represent something different. But if you look at, but there is more pressure coming from the public in, I don't know about in China, I think that might be a different thing, but certainly in Europe, the pressure that comes from the population is different because you have a population that, you know, I think is more informed. You have a population that is in a society in which the media systems are not so dominated by advertising and by corporate money, in which media systems have some kind of public function. And the reason, you know, Americans think this is not because Americans are stupid. You know, that's what a lot of time that's what Europeans and people around the world think. The idea of the stupid American. I don't think people are stupid in general or smart in general. I don't think I think human beings are human beings. But we will believe, well, one of the things we know is that what we believe is a function of the environment within which we operate, within which we live. And if that environment is full of these kinds of messages, then you'll believe one thing. And if the environment is full of other kinds of messages, you'll believe something else. So it's about what that environment is. If you want, let me give you I mean, this is about how media influence us and how populations are different. For example, the major thing that television does, right, what television does is it influences us in terms of how we think the world operates. And so the studies that have been done, this is within the United States, these studies have been done which divide the population up between people who watch a lot of television, like 8 hours a day or more, people who watch kind of a medium amount of television, which is 5 hours, and people who don't watch much television. And so you have this, so you can divide, so these are massive studies, made up of hundreds of thousands of people. And then you ask people what they think about various things. What is your view of immigration? What is your view of the death penalty? What is your view of gay marriage? What is your view of the economy? What is your view of fear? What is your view of how dangerous you think the world is? And what these studies have found is that you could have two homes, two people living right next to each other on the same street. Literally, the one household could watch, one person could watch 12 hours of television a day, and the other person could watch 0 hours of television. And even though they live only 20 yards apart, they essentially live in different worlds, because they live in a world, in one world in which the messages of television dominate, and another in which something else dominates. Now it doesn't, it depends what that something else is. But people think, so and what they've found is that people who watch a lot of television, who watch more television, think the world is a lot more dangerous than it actually is. They live in fear that their chances of being involved in a violent event are very high. Even though, and that's one of the things that's happened within the United States, levels of fear, sorry, I keep thinking from your end, okay, levels of fear, like people saying, like when people are asked how worried are you that something's going to happen, do you trust strangers? They ask a whole series of questions. That fear has gone up, the fear of strangers has gone up. When you look at actual events of violence in the real world, it's gone totally the opposite direction. So Americans are more fearful now than they've ever been, while the world they live in is there's never been safer. How to explain that? Well, the way to explain it is because people live in a world in which the messages of this world say that, if you watch television, you watch a lot of violence. You watch a lot of, I'm sure you can do it with the movies as well. If you live, human beings will reflect the environment within which they're brought up, and which is why the battle for media, the battle for media democracy is a key battle. How do we take the media back? How do we have media that are more democratic? How do we have media that are not just carriers of advertisers, but are carriers of other kinds of ideas? To the extent that you can make the media environment more democratic, you will at least provide the context within which a population can have access to different kinds of ideas. So again, you asked a question about climate change. Americans, that's why. It's because Americans have been inundated with this propaganda around climate change, and Europeans have been less so because there's been less focus there. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Do you think if there are more advertisements about climate change, do you think that would help change the mindset perhaps?
Depends what kind, right? I mean, nowadays, of course, everyone seems to be concerned with climate change. Right? You watch, oil companies are concerned with climate change. Right? BP has these ads about climate, right? So what that is, that's the recognition. Okay, we've lost the battle now about whether there is climate change. There is climate change. So everyone is an environmentalist. And now the question is, what kind of environmentalist? And so, BP, we're good environmentalists. We can keep going the same way. Look, we have different kinds of energy. But what you've got to look at is, so as soon as corporations start doing that actually is an indication to me that there's been a kind of tip in what the public believes. It's why everyone is environmentalist these days. Wasn't it 30 years ago? Environmentalists were regarded as loopy. You would be regarded as really lunatic to come out to do a workshop or some kind of event like this. You'd be tree huggers, and that has now changed. That has changed because of people struggling around this, and now everyone is an environmentalist. And now the question is, even oil companies are environmentalists. So the question is, what kind of environmentalist? So that's on the one hand. However, if you could have real messages around climate change, if you could democratize that world, if you could have Greenpeace, or if you could have Bill McKibben and his organization being given access in the same way that the oil companies are, yes, absolutely, you would change it. But that will require a huge amount of work to get those voices in. So absolutely, it's to do with how you can democratize, how you can have different voices in that space within which human beings think about the world. But again, I think you have to. You have to be on your toes. Like when BP starts saying it's an environmentalist. What kind of environmentalist? It's like everyone. I'll give you another example. 50 years ago. This is a world before you were born. 50 years ago. It was actually considered, in parts of this country, it was considered quite rational to be a racist. It was considered quite rational. In large parts of the South, it was considered quite, to think that black people were inferior because they were black. It was absolutely, and the white people were superior. It was absolutely, it was not some weird thing. Well, over the period of 50 years now, no one wants to be a racist. Only the lunatic, Ku Klux Klan fringe now are racist. Whereas in 50 years ago, mainstream politicians in the South used to be racist. They proudly proclaimed they were racist. What was his name? Strom Thurmond?
Strom Thurmond.
Strom Thurmond, right? I think he died, right? He was about 106.
Yeah.
But his phrase was, segregation now, segregation forever. 50 years ago. Nowadays, no one is a racist. Why? Because that battle has been fought. That battle, and at least, if you look, if Dr. King was to come back to the society right now, he would say, "What the hell happened? why are we even more structured along the lines of race than we were when I gave my speech? Why are black people even poorer now? Why are there more of them in prison, right? When you look at the surface, there seems to be even more racism in the actual, and yet no one will define themselves as a racist. I don't know if you remember, but George W. Bush, right after last year when he wrote his memoirs, he was asked by the commentator, he was asked by in a TV interview, and he said that this was in his memoir. He was said, what was the worst moment of your presidency? Okay. And it wasn't, if you think what happened in his presidency, it wasn't 9/11. It wasn't Katrina. It wasn't a whole host of other things it could be. You know the worst moment of George Bush's presidency, do you remember? It was when he was called a racist by Kanye West. He literally said that's the worst moment of his presidency. Kanye West said, I didn't care about black people, he called me a racist. I'm not a racist. How dare he call me a racist? Right? 50 years ago, he would have been proud to be a racist. Now that's changed. And I think the environmental stuff is the same way. Now that everyone is now an environmentalist, now the question is, what does that mean? The fact that no one considers themselves a racist has meant zero. Not zero. It's meant very little in terms of racial justice. It's meant very little in terms of the changes in how the society is structured around race, even though people don't think they're racist. And I think the same thing will happen around environmentalists. Everyone thinks everyone says they're environmentalists, but it's not reflected in anything real. And I think that's going to be the challenge: is to hold people's feet to the fire when they say they're environmentalists. What does that actually mean?
Back towards the end of your lecture, you talked about the different, like, you have a chance between the future being either democracy or turning to fascism. So if China were to become, by some miracle they realize about their economy and they become more green and they start focusing on the vision of sustainability, if that were to happen, would that mean that our future is more likely to go towards a communist kind of fascism somewhere around there, or socialism, or does it matter which countries change first, the government of the future?
Well, I think it does. I mean, right now, China, it's a very good question. I think China is absolutely central because it's the main economic, it's the main factory, it's the factory of the world. So if it decides to do things differently, if it decides to change its industrial policy to be more sustainable, that in and of itself will have an impact upon the environment. Now, how that will happen, right? I mean, the Chinese is a very interesting example because it's a mixture of market power with very authoritarian political structure. But if that's that may be what's required in the short term. And I'm not sure if I would call that people have called the Chinese example, market fascism. It's no longer communism or capitalism. There's all these variants that are going around. So in the short term, if China was to I don't think China will do that. China is in the battle for. They'll try and develop alternative fuels as much as they can, but they're also in the battle. That's going to take a while. Right? They're also in the battle to get fossil fuels, which they need, in the most efficient way, and which is why there is. There's the real possibility. There is tension in the South China Sea between China and the Philippines and American naval forces. Why? Because there are resources in the South China Seas. That's what the Michael Clare book, The Race for What's Left, says. If you look to see where the tensions are in the world, it's actually around where the resources are, and there'll be new actors in that. The new actors will be the United States to some degree, because its military power is the only power it has left. Russia, but Russia is in an enviable position in that it has a large amount of resources within its own borders, and China, which doesn't. And so you're going to see these tensions being played out with new actors, but with the same game, and the game is still going to be resources. In terms of the issue of, it's a good question. I don't really have an answer because I think that your politics doesn't work in that way, in that this happens in one country. I think within this country, you know, and that's what I think, you know, that's what we should be focused on. This is where we can have an impact. I think here there is a real possibility that the future is going to be not very pleasant. That the future is going to be more about division between people, increasing repression, increasing police repression, increasing military repression. We've already seen it, rather than some more open democratic space. That's the Tea Party versus Occupy battle. The Tea Party is about fear, and actually Occupy, I think, is about imagination and pleasure. And we've got to. And I'm not, you know, there's no doubt the forces of the state are with the Tea Party movement. You look at the Tea Party events, they had no police presence in them whatsoever. I mean, the Tea Party was being, I mean, the state was quite happy with the Tea Party. They were not happy with Occupy, and they got asked why. So, you know, I don't know, short term, I'm not a great believer that history will play itself out. History will play itself out in what people do. There's no abstract forces. There's no, you know, you can analyze, but in the end, history is what people make of it. History is what people do, and that's which is why and for me, you know, you're involved in that battle. We're involved in that battle, and I want to be able to fight it. And I use those terms, and some people get freaked when we start talking about battle and struggle, and it's like, get over it, we are in a battle. Right? It doesn't always have to be a physical battle, but we are in a battle of ideas, we are in a battle of imagination, we're struggling, and that's what human beings are. We struggle over different ways of thinking about the world. And that's what we've got to struggle with. That's the struggle that we have over the next little while. And I hope it'll be in a progressive direction. As I said, you've got to think short term, long term. Short term, short term with the election coming up, I don't think there's any, you know, I'm not one of these, I mean, some people say, oh, there's no difference between Democrats and Republicans, who cares? Well, I'm mostly with that, except I think there are some small differences, and I think there are some important differences. And my advice to people actually is, you know, I think this was the problem last time, is that even progressives, even people who thought themselves, you know, on the left wing, they really bought into this idea that Obama was some kind of magical figure. I mean, it was madness. It was madness. If you looked at Obama, Obama has been, always will be, it's what he is. He's a centrist Democrat. Okay, don't make him out to be something he's not. He's a centrist Democrat. He's a mainstream, you know, run the American empire. I can do that. I know how to run the American empire. That's what he is. What was interesting in the last election was I had friends, you know, who are progressives, who are really, they thought Obama was a socialist. They thought he was a community organizer. They thought he was progressive. And you know, I just kept looking and said, why would you think that? Why would you possibly think that Obama was any of these things? And then the reason they thought about it was they wanted him to be that because it made them feel good. It made them feel good. It made them, and when you think back on those, you know, most of you remember the election night in Hyde Park. You know, people, you know, like Jesse Jackson crying on. That was real. That was what Obama did. This is what Obama did, and this is why I'm really annoyed at his betrayal, because I think it is a betrayal. Obama, there was this great movement for change, and he kind of rode it. People were fed up with Bush. They were fed up with, you know, with 8 years of Republican. The society was falling apart. They wanted change, and there was this energy that was, and Obama rode that. He didn't create it. He rode it very, very smartly. And then what he could have done, and this is, actually he couldn't have, now I'm saying it, I'm, you know, contrary to my own argument. But a different candidate, if he was a different candidate, he would have kept that coalition together, and he would have made it something different. He could have changed the society. Not radically, but he could have been like, we've almost already heard about the New Deal and Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It could have been something like that, which is, it wasn't transforming the society, but it was saying we're actually going to put the needs of real people actually as important as the needs of corporations, and there's going to be a real partnership between corporations and government and representing the people. And that would have changed things. Instead, that coalition, that energy just went away. It went away for a while. Right? That energy, and American history is full of it. That progressive force never goes away. It sometimes goes under, then it rises again. And then it goes under, and then it rises again. And in that period coming up to the last election, it rose. And Obama rode it to victory, and then acted like he was, acted exactly what he was, and of course couldn't sustain it. Because that was built with all that vision, that energy included all kinds of different people who had all their different ideas of what Obama was about. And the energy went. It went for a couple of years, then it rose again. And it rose with Occupy. And Occupy is, I think, that energy coming up. Again, it's not the same as it was, but it's that same progressive energy. And Obama's going to try and capture it again. My advice to people will be: if you get fooled again, you've got to be idiots. Okay. I think the way to think about Obama in the next election. This will be my own. This is not my own advice to people. Obama versus Romney. It's not a contest in terms of what is possible. But treat it like a one-day election. Yes, vote for Obama. Don't spend your entire time working for Obama. Work on your own issue. Work on environmentalism. Work on sustainability. Work on what it is that makes you passionate. Because the moment Obama is elected, if he is elected, he's got to become the enemy. He's got to become what you put pressure on, because he's the representative of this system. As rational as it may be, he's the representative of the system. And you can't put pressure on someone you've just spent 6 months trying to elect. That's what happened last time. People just couldn't make that jump anymore, going from Obama is the solution to all our problems to actually how do we put pressure on it. So treat it like a one-day election. Vote for him, but don't work for him. Work on your own stuff, because your own issues and what you're concerned with are as important, and they're going to be as important the day after the election as they are right now. And you've got to be in a position to be able to put pressure at that place immediately. And that was the problem. Well, what should have happened was, all those when the Obama inauguration took place, right? I had friends, progressive friends, really good progressive people, fought their entire lives, were in the civil rights movement. They went down there as a celebration. Well, my advice to them would have been, I think it was, treat it like a one-day celebration. So celebrate the day of the inauguration. Then the next day, you're going to have massive demonstrations in Washington, putting pressure on Obama to act the way you want him to act. And that didn't happen last time. Whether it will happen this time, there's not much at stake. It's just the future of the planet is at stake as to how, not only whether Obama is elected, but what pressure Obama is under to do what needs to get done.
So if America does not change in time and Mitt Romney happens somehow, some crazy fluke of fate, he becomes president, does that mean we won't does that mean that we won't ever be able to pick up enough momentum in environmentalism to really make a change? Or will we...
It'll make it a lot more difficult. I'm not too sure about we'll never be able to, but it's going to be a lot more difficult to be able to, because government does matter. They have access to, to resources and to policy, so it does matter. It's just going to be, that much harder to do. I mean, the next election is going to be, I think, is, from my perspective, from my own kind of my scholarly interest, it's going to be really interesting, because there is, within the field I'm in, it's called cultural studies, and there is this kind of debate among people that said, well, there's some people who think that
that people are kind of like cultural dopes and they're stupid and that they'll just do anything you tell them to do. On the one hand, and there's another kind of debate that says actually people are really smart and clever and they negotiate among different things and that they're not as dumb as these cultural dopes make them out to be. And I actually think this next election will decide that. Because Romney, right? If Romney was to win, you cannot think. I think even Sarah Palin will be a stronger candidate. I can't think of a weaker candidate than Romney. If he was to win, it would show that money can buy anything. It would show that money and access to billions of dollars, you can convince anyone of anything. That's actually what will be. That's going to be an interesting battle. Now, the question of how much money is Obama going to be able to raise? We've got these billionaires on the one hand, right? But there's going to be more money. All this talk about raising money in politics. The question: what's the money going to be used for? The money is going to be used for advertising. That's what it's going to be used for. It's going to be used to try and convince people through advertising that this way of the world is better than this way of the world. And this will be a great. This as I said, the next election will be a great test of whether people really are cultural dopes or they're smart enough to see through stuff, even despite the masses of propaganda that they'll be subjected to.
Any other questions? You guys? All right, thank you so much for coming. So, Professor Jhally, are you working on anything related to sustainability in any of your current research or work? I mean, it's all related, of course, but.
Well, actually, the major thing is this lecture that I mentioned Michael Clare did.
Yeah.
We taped that. We videotaped it, and so we're going to produce a DVD.
Nice.
And there's going to have some graphics and visuals and stuff.
That's awesome.
In it. And there's a couple of other lectures we're working on which are similar as well. So.
Very cool. Best of luck. I think we're gonna have to try to get him to next year's. He'd be a great speaker.
Absolutely, yeah, and he's local as well. So.
Yeah, that's right. Perfect. Keep the speakers local. Keep transportation costs down. Energy conservation.
So is this just this week, or how long is this thing going for?
So this will someone want to tell Professor Jhally?
Friday was the last one.
Friday, yeah. And where are you going back to? Where are you from? Where's everyone from?
From Italy.
Italy, right?
From just outside of Boston.
Wellesley?
Nashville, New Hampshire, Bronx,
Provincetown.
New Jersey, Rochester, Virginia.
So a couple of Virginia, one Italian, and most of New England. Yeah, that's pretty wide.
Yeah. So this Friday, actually, if you're available, we'll send you an email. But everyone's been working on community organizer-related projects to bring back to their communities, and we're going to have like an oral defense. So that's what everyone's been working on. We've been working on strategy, tactics. What else? Goals. Persuasive reasoning, messaging.
Well, send me an email. I'm not quite sure.
We will, for sure. Absolutely. No, we'd love to have you. Totally. Yeah. Yeah.
Long time ago, where I was born in. Why?
Because my dad. I'm just wondering where.
Well, I was born there, but we moved to England when I was 6, so it's a long time.
Thank you. So we're having a great night.
Thank you again so
Sure,
much
yeah,
for
it was a
coming.
pleasure,
Yeah,
yeah.
hopefully we can have you next year. I don't know. It's pretty great.
What is he a professor of? Economics?
Yeah, we'll send it to you. It's actually pretty impressive.
Okay, actually, yeah, send it to me. We actually have a
Intimidating.
website now.
Oh, perfect.
Stuff, so.
Yeah, if you got it, to make it easier, you can edit it down.
Yeah,
You
it's
can
been a while.
edit it down.
That's like 3 times worse.
That's actually what works.
Or I think it's like twice
Oh, I got it, that's
I
what I
know, me
would add.
too.
Oh, yeah, so we're just trying to take advantage of it and
Otherwise, I'm
review lectures and use them.
Or just- if
And
just
then
want-
afterwards, we're gonna settle it, yeah.
Or just want something to give you.
Oh, that was bad.
All right, guys. So, can someone just give me a quick announcement?